When a father and son plan a day of cave diving, they never expect a stunning catastrophe to overwhelm their group. A desperate struggle to find the way out leads to a devastating outcome. This is the fatal breakdown of the Manatee Springs tragedy. On March 14, 2022, two friends, Sam and Henry, decided to test their cave diving skills in the Manatee Springs cave system. They had been diving together for a few years and had earned their Intro to Cave Diving certificate. On this trip, the guys decided to bring their dads to this diving adventure in Florida. The Manatee Springs was a well-known diving spot, with a clear spring-fed pool at the end, which was good for open-water divers. There were 3 other sinkholes which served as entrances to the cave system below. Catfish Hotel, Sue's Sink, and Friedman's Sink were all sinkhole areas, where the surface had collapsed long ago, to create an open pool which led down into the cave tunnel below. This tunnel went on many thousands of feet, but only the end had the entrance pools for divers. The cave system was known as a siphon because the water flowed like a river from some distant entry point and came out as a natural spring at its end point in the main Manatee Spring. Because of this water flow, cave divers generally entered in one location and exited downstream in another. This type of diving, called a traverse, is more risky because of the added challenge of knowing 2 different pathways instead of just one. What makes it particularly difficult, in a cave where none of the divers has been before, is that the tunnels do not look like they do on a map. The simple line drawings that are often guides for divers don't truly reveal the complexity of the ceilings, walls, false exits, and split pathways. What looks like a clear opening above might really be a tight passage, blocked by rock formations. It takes an experienced diver to guide someone through on their first effort, to point out the landmarks and danger zones. Manatee Springs State Park requires full cave diving certification and diving with someone with prior experience at Manatee in order to enter the cave portion of the springs. The group was truly excited by this challenging system, and all 4 were Intro to Cave Diving certified. This meant that they had completed the first half of the training course and were diving to get more experience at this level before attempting the full certification. This is a great plan, but can leave divers in a difficult position before becoming fully certified. The temptation to dive beyond your training and certification can be hard to resist. The guys had watched some YouTube videos about the path through the Manatee Springs cave system, so they were quite excited to give it a try. Unfortunately, this entire system would be classified beyond their certification. Entering a siphon or diving with a traverse were both reserved for fully certified divers. Nonetheless, Sam, with his dad Robert, and Henry, with his dad John, would be pushing the boundaries doing a traverse dive in a siphon. Their biggest fear was accidentally ending the traverse at Manatee Springs. Over the years, this end of the cave diving path has been considered a bit treacherous. When water flow was high, the stream was a powerful siphon that could not be evaded. Once the flow caught you and pushed out towards the exit, you were committed. This flow has been described as a fire hose, and mostly has been exhilarating for trained divers. But this exit hole is small, and sometimes too small. The flow of the water can deposit large rocks and sediment around the opening, or collapses in the pool above can change the debris field around the hole's exit. Just 3 years before, in 2019, a Chinese diver named Zhou Min suffered a devastating end to an incredible dive trip. As an experienced, fully certified cave diver, she was aware of the kinds of challenges which could possibly arise in a siphon. The current was so strong, she was pushed through the exit hole and became completely stuck. She was pressed with such unrelenting force, she just could not be freed. Zhou Min died wedged in the small hole leading to Manatee Spring. A desperate effort to free her had completely failed. They were acutely aware of the danger and planned to exit the system before the tight squeeze at the main spring. In the sinkhole swimming areas, there are warning signs posted at the bottom to discourage regular divers from exploring beyond the open water areas. Cave diving is its own special category, requiring multi-level advanced certification before traversing through a siphon and navigating on your own. But clearly, even this extensive training cannot fully guarantee your safety. Robert and Sam, and their friends John and Henry, were suited up and ready to go with their side-mounted air tanks. Each person would have 2 tanks of air, which should have been more than enough for the dive that they had planned. Each tank was full, at 3,800 pounds per square inch. Their dive would be at a depth of 100 feet, which equates to 4 atmospheres of pressure. This means that the air in the tanks would be compressed to 1/4 of the volume and thus used 4 times faster than at the surface. They all carried primary and secondary light sources and dive computers to track their depth, heart rate, movement, and time. Each of the dads was also bringing a camera with a large floodlight mounted to capture footage of the dive. They were completely prepared with the best equipment and thoughtful preparation. They just had no idea of what was waiting for them inside this deceptive cave. At 11:17 a.m., Sam and Henry took the lead, and their dads followed just behind as they made their way into the entrance at Friedman's Sink. This was a common entering point for the traverse, because the water flowed down from this entrance to the next 2 stops, Sue's Sink and Catfish Hotel, before ending at the main Manatee Spring. The flow of the water pulled the guys along in a gentle current, easing the amount of exertion they had to expend to move the 1,700-foot distance between Friedman's and Catfish Hotel, where they planned to exit. They enjoyed the first 975 feet of the dive and came upon the line leading up to Sue's Sink exit. The upline was tied off on a rock to the side and was fairly nondescript. This exit was really just for emergencies, because it was a camping location around the water, not really set up for divers. They noticed the faint pool of light leaking from above the thin rope leading down near the main line. They knew that the next stop would be Catfish Hotel in just over 700 more feet. They were moving at a reasonable pace and had not used too much air at this point. They were feeling the swell of confidence in moving through this siphon and ticking another notch on their dive belts. As they continued on, Sam suddenly reached the end of the main line. It just stopped. They had never seen the line leading up to Catfish Hotel, so this was truly confusing. The other divers all caught up, and the men were looking around to see if they had missed something. John swam up to the ceiling of the tunnel and looked for a hint of light to show the way out. They saw nothing. He was a body length away from the main line, and decided that that was as far as he could venture untethered. An instant flutter of discomfort hit them all at once. Things weren't going to plan, and they really weren't sure where they were. Robert wrote on his wet notes, "Manatee?" questioning whether they had accidentally swam all the way to the end and were at risk for being squeezed through the tiny hole leading up to the spring. Now that their plan had been disrupted, the father-son pairs teamed up and agreed to turn back. Either they had missed the line up to Catfish Hotel, or maybe confused it with Sue's Sink by mistake. Either way, they wouldn't be going forward with no line, and the nearest exit that they knew of was back behind them. Robert checked his air. He had 3,000 psi remaining, so there was no reason to panic. A sense of unease had settled among them, but they only had to follow the line back the way they came. Simple, right? When it comes to cave diving, there is no simple. Anything can become a complex set of tasks that feels impossible to overcome. The group headed back, with Robert and Sam leading the way. Robert had turned off his video camera and focused on the risky task ahead. As soon as they started moving back, the resistance of the water was shocking. It had been so gentle and easy before, but now the turbulence of the flow against their masks and tanks was challenging. They knew that the path was only 737 feet, if they were correct about their location. Robert put his head down and pulled hand over hand to move back upstream. His heart was starting to thump out of his chest at 175 beats per minute, and his breathing rate increased 3 times. Over several minutes, the dread of not making it was hitting them all. The unreal exertion they were facing was exhausting the air in their tanks, way faster than planned. Each person had their own burn rate, based on their normal rate of breathing, body size, fitness, experience, and anxiety. John and Henry could see the lights in front of them on the line, but the particles in the water made the sight line fairly short. The tunnel turned one way, and then the other, so they could not always see the group in front of them. John had his camera's floodlight on, hoping to illuminate the way with the brighter light. Unfortunately, this might have been the final critical mistake that sealed their fate. Sam had been carefully watching the line, looking for the tie-off that would lead up to the closest exit. He was starting to feel the panic, because they should have found it by now. He pulled frantically and heaved breaths in a dangerous frenzy, when suddenly the gentle glow of daylight could be seen just ahead. It was exhilarating and sickening at the same time. He could see where the exit was, and just needed to get out of this water. He reached out to transfer to the upline and turned back to motion to his father. Sam pulled himself up and moved around a few rocks blocking the exit tunnel that led to the surface of Sue's sink. Robert had been suppressing the panicky thought that they were going to run out of air. The exertion and anxiety had tripled the speed he was burning his air. Seeing Sam's indication that they were going up dropped his stomach and flooded him with relief of knowing where they were. As he pulled himself up on the line, he motioned back to Henry that this was the jump that led to the exit. He could see the bright light of John's camera and felt good that they were all going to have a story to tell once this was over. John kept his camera light pointed ahead, hoping to catch a glimpse of the rope that led the way out. He was pulling against the current and watching his son's fins just ahead of him. He too was feeling the panic and wanted Henry to move faster, so he pushed his legs to encourage him to speed up. They both knew that this extra effort and stress was using the air much faster than planned, but they had brought an excessive amount of air for the trip and were comfortable that it would get them to the exit. Henry put his head down and pulled faster and faster on the rope. His dad kept pushing his legs and clearly thought he needed to move much more quickly. It was nerve-wracking to say the least. He needed to carefully look for the exit rope to get out, but he also needed to hurry and move as fast as possible. They should have come to the exit already, and there was no sign of Robert and Sam. Henry was truly panicked now. He knew that if they somehow swam past the exit at Friedman's, they would be swimming into an endless abyss that goes on, with no other exit. He pulled and pulled against the current, and his dad continued to grab onto his legs every now and then, in what he thought was an encouragement to move faster. What they didn't know was that the floodlight on his dad's camera washed out the faint hint of light from the opening above. The upline's visibility was blocked by some rocks when swimming upstream, and they never even saw it. Robert and Sam had burst through the water at Sue's sink at 12 o'clock. It was an unfamiliar pond, but they were so extremely grateful to be breathing the air and free of the cave's tunnels. A few minutes passed, and then a few more, and still, there was no sign of their friends. It should have taken them maybe 3 minutes to catch up, but they never did. Sam thought about diving back down to see if they were there, but Robert insisted that they get out of the water and call 911. If something was wrong, the two exhausted divers would be of little help to John and Henry with their own nearly empty air tanks. They felt that they needed fresh divers with full tanks of air. For Henry and John, 20 agonizing minutes went by in a frenzy of swimming and looking, exhausting their air supply, feeling like they may truly be trapped in this tunnel of water. Each promising cove in the ceiling gave them hope that this was it, but then disappointment flooded back when it was nothing but a false dome. Henry was absolutely frantic when he saw the glow of light from Friedman's sink. He rushed ahead to the upline and looked back to see his father's camera light behind him. The desperate fight to find an exit was finally over, and Henry burst through the surface in relief and confusion. What happened to the other uplines at Sue's Sink and Catfish Hotel? He didn't understand what had gone wrong. He wanted to talk with his dad about it, but he was taking a long time to make it up the line. It was 12:20, and they had been in the water just over an hour. He looked at his pressure gauge to see that one of his tanks was now completely empty, and the other had less than 1,500 psi. He had barely made it, and he was smaller and more fit than his dad. He waited a minute or two, but there were no air bubbles of an approaching diver. Henry was stunned. He was certain that his panicked father had used his own air much quicker and would likely be completely out of air. Robert and Sam had headed over to Friedman's sink to see if they had surfaced there. The three of them could do nothing but wait, and wonder how they could have missed the line up to Catfish Hotel. What they didn't know was that there was no line going up to Catfish Hotel. From down in the cave system, you can't see the light from the sinkhole above. You would have to go up through a hole in the ceiling, move forward about 10 feet, then go up through another hole that leads to Catfish Hotel. Without prior experience, they would have no way of knowing this. Many divers enter through Catfish to set their own jump lines down to the cave's main line. This gives them some idea of the path and a certain connection with their own dive lines. Despite having cave experience and certification, the group encountered one of the many risks involved in cave diving. At 12:50, the first qualified rescue divers arrived, and later 2 members of the International Underwater Cave Rescue and Recovery Team joined. Sadly, they located John's lifeless body, just 100 feet from the exit at Friedman's sink. Both of his tanks were found to be completely empty. He had traveled 3,400 feet through the cave system and ran out of air in the last 100 feet. It was a heartbreaking realization. His final movements were recorded at 12:17, just 3 minutes before Henry had surfaced, and 17 minutes after their friends had surfaced at Sue's sink. When Henry looked back to see his father's light, at that very moment, he was likely struggling to breathe, or possibly even dead. Despite their planning and training, cave diving stole another life from a completely unsuspecting family. This continues to serve as a stark reminder of the absolute necessity for full certification when it comes to cave diving. Diving and ongoing training with experienced team members helps ease the slow evolution from beginner to expert. No matter the time or level of experience, there is always the risk of uncontrollable factors and mistakes. Many elite divers have lost their lives in the unforgiving confines of underwater caves.